Wow, it has been over 2 years since I covered an Astro City comic. Let me make up for that by covering the longest Astro City storyline to date, The Dark Age. Quick refresher for those not in the know. Astro City is a series written by Kurt Busiek and drawn by Brad Anderson, with gorgeous covers by legendary artist Alex Ross. The stories take place in a universe where superheroes exist, with the titular Astro City serving as the hub for most of them. The main draw of this series is, however, not the superheroes themselves. It is more about exploring what it's like to live in a world where these characters exist and their stories take place, while also allowing for the passage of time and characters to grow, both emotionally and physically. More often than not, it's possible to see entire stories focusing on regular civilians instead of superpowered characters, which are also widely considered to be some of the best, considering the sheer acclaim of stories like The Nearness of You. So, let's get into the Dark Age, which takes place between the 1970s and the 1980s. And, like a lot of Astro City stories, the focus is on the perspective of the civilian duo. The year is 1959. Charles steals an apple from a shop, which his younger brother Royal thinks they shouldn't have. The two brothers are mesmerized by a huge fight taking place in their streets between the superhero team Honor Guard and the criminal organization Pyramid. After sneaking into a back alley, the boys encounter the superhero Black Bat, which instills a sense of responsibility in Charles. Later that night, after their dad hears about everything, he assures them that the future looks bright as the family sits down to dinner. The year is 1972. Charles is a police officer, while Royal is a low-level thief. Naturally, the two have drifted apart, to the point where when they meet up, Charles doesn't even acknowledge Royal as his brother. However, he still cares enough to let Royal know that there's a new guy in town called the Blue Knight, who straight up executes criminals. Said Blue Knight shows up at one of Royal's jobs and executes nearly everyone there, with Royal barely getting to safety. He's forced to turn to Charles for help, and they discover a mark on Royal's neck, a gun sight. Charles helps Royal hide underground, but the fractured relationship between the two comes to a head, with Royal pointing out that the woman Charles was going to marry was only interested in him for money, and Charles being tired of having to clean up after his brother. Of course, the strain in their relationship can be traced all the way back to that night in 1959, when an escaping Pyramid agent broke into their homes and killed their parents. That fateful night caused them both to lose their faith in heroes permanently, the sole thing the brothers still share as adults. Royal seemingly catches a lucky break as a bunch of mystical heroes seemingly defeat the Blue Knight and stop his activities. But during a massive fight between the invading hordes of Monstro City and the heroes of Astro City, the Blue Knight resurfaces and goes after him. But Charles gets in the way and puts himself between Royal and the Knight, which causes the anti-hero to back off. And so Charles and Royal reconcile. Nope! Just one incident couldn't repair the bonds that shattered between them, and they go their separate ways. The year is 1976. Charles has been promoted to major crimes, but is struggling with regard to his marriage, his corrupt fellow officers trying to get him to accept bribes, and internal affairs breathing down his neck to get him to bust corruption in the department. Royal isn't doing much better, working for a mob boss named the Platypus, but he's still unwilling to kill people or even load his gun. Both brothers haven't spoken to each other in a while, but just want to keep their heads down and carry on. However, with the increased tensions in Astro City, that just wasn't possible. Charles is shot by his corrupt partner and is left for dead. Luckily, Royal spots him and fires his boss's entire weapons cache in the air to get the police's attention. He does manage to get Charles medical attention, and before going to jail, he he tells Charles that he found the guy who killed their parents, who happened to be a high-ranking pyramid official. The year is 1982. Royal is undercover in Pyramid, hoping to find the man behind his parents' murder. He's actually working for Eagle, a peacekeeping organization, and his contact is his brother Charles, who is also an Eagle agent. Unfortunately, Royal is suspected to be a mole and goes into hiding. Charles tries to get him to go back undercover, but Royal tells him that the only reason he told Charles about their parents' killer, Aubrey Jason, was to motivate him so that he'd recover, not to put them on a potentially suicidal path. Unable to convince Royal, Charles decides to go undercover in Pyramid, despite the risks involved as a former cop and Eagle agent. However, Royal had also returned undercover and managed to find out that Jason had showed up at the main headquarters, as all Pyramid agents had been called in to capture the superhero team Apollo 11. The two actually managed to corner Jason, but he gets away and puts the brothers in the hospital. However, they recover and plan to hunt down Jason together from here on out. The year is 1984. The Williams brothers are constantly caught in a cat-and-mouse game across the world between themselves and Aubrey Jason, using whatever tech they can scrounge from either the good guys and the bad guys. Jason has managed to stay a step ahead of them, but has seemingly run out of resources and is stuck in Vegas, begging a mad scientist to give him superpowers. It works, and he uses his new, vague, omniscient powers to learn everything about them. But before he can kill them, his powers seemingly run out, and the building collapses, though Jason escapes one last time, back to Astro City. The brothers manage to track him, though not before Royal has a chance meet up with the now retired Black Badge, who can tell that something's troubling him, and he should probably let it go. The brothers manage to get into the building where Jason's hiding, and while they fight, I'm gonna pause and take you back to 1959 so that we can see the events unfold from another perspective. The year is 1959. The Silver Agent fights the organization Pyramid alongside Honor Guard. Later that night, the Silver Agent pursues a fleeing Pyramid member, failing to notice the two young boys hiding in the home he had rampaged in. The year is 1972. The Silver Agent is arrested for the supposed murder of a supervillain on foreign soil. Due to mounting pressure on the US, both externally and internally, the agent receives the death penalty. While kept in his cell, the agent disappears for 6 minutes and reappears in a tattered version of his costume. On the day of his death, with a bloodthirsty public out for the agent's blood, Monstro City invades Astro City. The fight ends when the agent appears in a giant-sized apparition in front of their leader and manages to sue for peace. The agent shrinks down to regular size, assures the people that despite the tough times coming, everything will eventually be okay, and vanishes. The news confirms that the agent has been executed 2 minutes before he arrived in Astro City. The year is 1976. The anti-hero in Black Velvet has been mortally wounded by the assassin Jitterjack. Her powers, already causing people to feel hatred on a low scale, now erupts, leading to mass chaos. Even the heroes start to be affected, as Hellhound unleashes his inner demons, literally, and Street Angel, who used to be Black Velvet's partner, considers ending his life. But then a hand appears on his shoulder, telling him that there is no need for this and he's still needed. The Silver Agent gets to Black Velvet and is able to stop her. As the now grateful crowd swarms the agent, he tells them to let Honor Guard know that they need to meet him at the Falls at 10:33 a.m. on May 3rd, 1982, and that everything does get better as he vanishes. The year is 1982. The agent arrives on time and heads with Honor Guard to storm Pyramid's base. As other heroes also join the fray, they notice that Pyramid's attempts to use Apollo 11's powers have summoned a being called Karish the Devastator. As a three-way fight breaks out between Pyramid, Karish, and the heroes, The crowd cheers on, believing that the Silver Agent will save them. Meanwhile, a hero known as the Point Man grabs a weapon called the Innocent Gun, believed to be the most powerful weapon in all of existence, and fires it at Karish. The entity is destroyed, but at the cost of a lot of lives, and a hole is torn in reality. The Silver Agent has schematics to seal off the tear, but as he vanishes again, the crowd berates him as he tries to say that everything will get better, as they don't quite believe him. The year is 2200? The Silver Agent has been briefed about what he needs to do by the Silver Centurions, an organization inspired by him in the future, and heads back to the past backwards to several crisis points in the past, starting from the year 1984. The agent ends up in Vegas in the middle of a fight between the heroes Hellhound and Mirage and a bunch of mutated homeless people. However, at the same time, thanks to the reality splintering in 1982, a being known as the Pale Horseman emerges from the shadows and starts killing anyone it deems a criminal, while also generating waves of hatred and terror throughout the populace. The Silver Agent drops down into the chaos near the rift, which is where we can now bring the Williams brothers back into the story. When the agent comes face to face with Charles and Royal, he tells them of the situation and that he wants to deputize them to stop Aubrey Jason, as it would help stop the Pale Horseman. Charles is pissed at this and tells the agent that they're gonna deal with Jason, while the agent holds off his lackeys. The Pale Horseman realizes that Jason is stealing his power and shows up to take it back. Jason barely fends off the Horseman, but with his power drained, he tries to steal some from Charles, who instead yanks the source of his powers off him as the Horseman returns. Jason tries to get away, causing the floor to rupture and the agent to nearly fall to his death. But as Charles plans to chase after Jason again, Royal decides to save the agent instead, causing Charles to help his brother do so. As the brothers save the agent, Jason and the Pale Horseman end up getting sucked into the rift, ending their threat. The Silver Agent thanks them for everything, and the brothers decide to let their hatred of the man go, realizing that it didn't matter. Not anymore. The year is 2010. Charles and Royal have retired and opened up their own chartering business. They tell their stories to a reporter who wants to write a book about them, suggesting they use pseudonyms, Charles and Royal. As he concludes the interview, the reporter asks a final question. When did they feel that the darkness over Astro City had faded completely? The brothers answer, a year or two later from the Pale Horseman incident, when a space shuttle was saved by the superhero Samaritan, who was making his first appearance. I'm being a bit facetious here, but the story is not at all subtle about the anti-heroes who show up. It does a decent job showing how one might sympathize with an anti-hero, while also showing the eventual result of sliding down that slippery slope. In part 1 of the Dark Age, the only notable anti-hero is the Blue Knight, who Royal doesn't even believe is real because he can't imagine the heroes killing, or someone killing for a good reason. Now, the Blue Knight is an established character whose backstory I am going to gloss over because I intend to talk about the first story he appeared in separately at some point, but for the purposes of this video, let's just say he has a sympathetic backstory that might endear people to his point of view. He also has lines that he isn't willing to cross. He won't hurt an innocent to punish the guilty. As we move into part 2, we see a noticeable rise in anti-heroes, people motivated out of vengeance rather than altruism. Most of these characters have a core motivation to get back at someone who did them wrong, which makes them sympathetic, but it probably would be inaccurate to say they're doing what they're doing just to help people. But when push comes to shove with the Black Velvet incident, they put aside their need for vengeance and work on saving people, proving that they're also heroes when the situation requires them to be. But it's in part 4 where we see the end result of all this. There are people going around killing people in the name of justice. We see Glue, a corrupted copy of the character Jack in the Box, acting as some sort of lethal protector, doling out what he thinks is justice by killing criminals. We see guys named Stone Cold, Broadsword, and a team of Blue Knights inspired by the original going around acting as judge, jury, and executioner. Eventually, a hellspawn from another dimension shows up to eviscerate children stealing shopping carts. Now I know what some of you are probably thinking. Surely that's a bit of an exaggeration. Not everybody ends up that way, and killing one bad guy doesn't make one likely to become a mass murderer with a skewed sense of morality. Well, you're right. It doesn't. The Blue Knight didn't kill Charles to get to Royal. But you know who did kill a lot of people to get to their intended target? Charles and Royal themselves. Yes, during their worldwide manhunt for Aubrey Jason, Charles and Royal don't hesitate to gun down anybody working for him, even if they're not doing so of their own free will. I think it's not too much of a stretch to say that the Dark Age is essentially a depiction of two men slowly becoming what they hate in pursuit of a single target. They become so singularly focused on their mission that they ignore everything around them. Kinda what was implied Silver Agent did when their parents died. But instead of focusing on them some more, I want to talk about another character who went through their own arc in the background. Writer Kurt Busiek has stated that he doesn't see the characters in Astro City as replacements for existing characters, but instead as archetypes who play a similar role. And it's not hard to agree more when looking at Street Angel, a character meant to parallel the role played by Daredevil, but cannot really be called the same person, though I do get a kick out of the similarities. The character of Street Angel starts as a fun, swashbuckling superhero just like the initial version of Daredevil by Stan Lee and Bill Everett. He then becomes a darker version of himself, depicted not only visually with a change in costume, but also with a shift in attitude, now using harder-hitting weaponry while fighting crime, like Daredevil when Frank Miller took over. The similarities are further highlighted as, just like Daredevil, Street Angel begins to work with the anti-hero in Black Velvet, who brings out his inner darkness. Though in the Angel's case, it is a bit more obvious, as opposed to Elektra, who only did so superficially. Hilariously, Black Velvet also dies in a manner similar to Elektra, stabbed through the heart by an assassin working for a major crime boss. However, there are some key differences between the two. The Street Angel, upon realizing that he may have killed some people unknowingly under the influence of Black Velvet, decides to turn himself in. He is declared not guilty, but decides to stop being Street Angel for a while, and instead goes on to provide medicines in Central Africa. However, during the Pale Horseman's rampage, he willingly puts on a new version of his Street Angel costume and decides to address the public. He even confronts the Pale Horseman, who wants to kill the Angel for his activities under Black Velvet's influence, and points out the hypocrisy in the Horseman's logic, as while the Angel had accidentally killed people who were criminals, the Horseman deliberately kills people who might not even be considered as such. Sadly, pointing this out is the last thing Street Angel does. I have touched upon this briefly in the past, but the TLDR version of this is that the late 80s and early 90s are often classified as the dark age of comics, due to the medium's increased focus on morally ambiguous characters, i.e. anti-heroes, over traditional superheroes who were often considered passé and outdated. Naturally, a series that focuses on superhero archetypes isn't going to miss out on the opportunity to comment on this period, especially in a story titled The Dark Age. One of the things that stood out to me was the group of Blue Knights that showed up in part 4 of the story. As the OG Blue Knight definitely takes a bit of inspiration from the Punisher, I feel that the fact that there are a bunch of Blue Knights running around could be a commentary on the number of characters copying him. Or it could also be a commentary on the Frank Castle popularity during the 90s, as at one point he had 3 ongoings and quite a few miniseries during this time. There are also a few minor jabs at Spider-Man, with his XP Jack-in-the-Box mentioned to have become a bit darker, and of course, getting replaced by Glue, which is a 1-2 punch about the Clone Saga and the rise of Venom. The story also takes the time to mention that the people didn't really care about the adventures of Honor Guard and the First Family in the same way the general public reading comics at the time didn't seem to care that much about whatever was going on in Justice League, Fantastic Four, and the Avengers. The only superhero team to get an extensive amount of focus is Apollo 11, which, considering they are one of the few teams to be referred as freaks, makes it clear that they are playing the role the X-Men played, although they share more similarities with the Eternals. And of course, there's the Pale Horsemen themselves, a creature from the depths of hell that disrupted the proceedings in Astro City and heavily upturned the status quo. While he bears more of a visual resemblance to Ghost Rider, I actually lean more in the direction of a different character, Spawn, a character who certainly captivated audiences of the time with his distinct design and dark stories, and made huge splashes in the comic book industry, which led to Spawn and his ilk to carve out their own niche under the Image Comics banner, just like how the Pale Horsemen and other antiheroes were doing at the time in Astro City. But, personally speaking, while the Dark Age of comics had a lot of negatives, there is one major positive worth talking about: an overall increase in diversity. This is more of a coincidence, to be honest, as with an increase in awareness, creators had started to put a lot more effort into being inclusive. And there are sprinkles of that in this story arc, with the second Cleopatra being a black woman and the second Quarrel taking over her father's villainous legacy and turning it into a heroic one. Finally, even the public isn't spared from criticism. While Astro City hasn't shied away from depicting how little public adoration means in the Confessions arc, which I will also definitely cover at some point as well, this is flip-flopped here. On one hand, the hero's activities are constantly criticized, with over 75,000 people being present at the Silver Agent's execution to cheer it happening, and the fact that the constant fights just seem to hurt people around them. But on the other hand, whenever the world is at stake, the public will cheer for the heroes to save them. Again, the fickleness of the public is better depicted in the Confessions arc, but it's still well done here. Additionally, Kurt Busiek also seems to comment on our fondness for violence, with TV shows depicting the public devouring footage of the new anti-hero's activities and cheering on the Pale Horseman when he shows up, although that might be more out of fear. While Astro City is overall a very well-regarded series, I have seen some online chatter suggesting that the Dark Age is perhaps the weakest of all the story arcs we've seen so far, with the main weaknesses being the slightly darker tone and the fact that the entire story arc took 6 years to conclude, from August 2005 to June 2010. Frankly, these weaknesses aren't really weaknesses in my opinion, and are just a result of an attempt to rank these stories, with one arc needing to be worst by comparison. The first weakness is easily addressed. In the early days of the comic, we see a statue of the Silver Agent with the plaque, "To Our Eternal Shame," which means that this was a plot that was at least being developed or thought of for a while. And a darker story is not necessarily a bad thing, as it makes us appreciate the lighter ones more. As for the story arc being long, I will admit if you had been reading it at the time, it would definitely have been an issue. However, most of you watching this are probably like me and have read, or hopefully will read, this story collected in its entirety, so that's a moot point now. In conclusion, I like the story, just as much as I like all Astro City stories. I feel the Williams brothers are compelling protagonists, and the tragedy of the Silver Agent is suitably heart-wrenching. And that's really all I have to say so for now. So, thanks for watching!